Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a file that, I'll be honest, it feels a little bit like handling uranium.
That is a very good way to put it.
It's powerful, it's necessary, but if you don't handle it right, it's explosive.
That is probably the most accurate way to describe the book we're covering. We are looking at Brain Sex, The Real Difference Between Men and Women by Anne Moore and David Jessel.
And before anyone panics or thinks we're just doing a one-off controversial take, I want to set the stage here. This isn't just a book review.
Not at all.
This is part one of a special series we're doing. We realized we couldn't just skim this topic in 20 minutes and do it justice. So over the next few deep dives, we're going to follow the human lifespan from the womb through childhood, puberty, and into adulthood.
Exactly. It's a chronological journey. But to do that journey, we have to start with the foundation, the bedrock. And that's what today is. It's the core argument.
The big debate.
The big debate. We have to look at the central thesis of Moore and Jessel, which creates the friction for everything else we're going to discuss.
Right. And just to orient everyone, Anne Moore is a geneticist. She has a PhD. And David Jessel is a TV writer and presenter.
Right.
So the book has this really interesting mix of, very dense biological data, but it's wrapped in a story that's designed to be readable.
Mm-hmm.
But their opening premise is not subtle.
Yeah.
They essentially claim that for the last 40 or 50 years, society has been built on a lie.
A scientific lie, as they call it. They really don't mince words.
The lie being the blank slate theory, the idea that a baby boy and a baby girl are born with identical brains.
Completely identical.
And the only reason they end up different is because we wrap one in a blue blanket and give him a truck, and the other in a pink blanket and give her a doll.
Correct. That's the sociological argument. It was the dominant view of the 1960s and 70s, and honestly, it's still the dominant view in a lot of cultural conversations today.
That gender is a construct.
Performance learned from society. And Moore and Jessel are coming in and saying, no, that is biologically impossible.
They use a really striking comparison right at the start about our organs. They say, look, you wouldn't say a kidney is neutral or a pair of lungs is neutral.
Right. They have a function, a structure.
So why do we assume the brain, the most complex organ we have, is the only part of the body that has no sex?
It's such a great point. They argue the brain is an organ just like the liver or the heart. And just like the rest of our body, it is sexed. Meaning it's physically, chemically, and structurally different in men and women. And crucially, they argue, this all happens long before the blue or pink blankets ever show up.
It happens in the womb.
It happens in the womb.
Which we're going to cover in detail in the next deep dive because that process is just wild. But for today, we have to stick to the argument itself. If the biology is so clear, at least according to them, why was there this massive push to deny it?
Well, you have to look at the context. In the 60s and 70s, you had this necessary, powerful push for equality. Women were fighting for rights they'd been denied for centuries. And the authors argue that in the zeal to achieve political equality, society made a category error. We confused equality with sameness.
That distinction is really the hinge of this whole thing, isn't it?
It is. Equality is a moral imperative, a political right. Sameness is a biological claim, and they argue that you can have equality without sameness.
In fact, they say trying to force sameness actually destroys real equality.
It undermines it. They use a metaphor about the Olympics that I found really helpful.
The pole vaulters, right?
Yes, the pole vaulters. They say if you try to achieve equality by pretending men and women are biologically identical, it's like handicapping Olympic pole vaulters with lead weights, just to make sure everyone jumps the same height.
You're not creating fairness. You're just creating an artificial distortion. You're punishing the strengths of one to match the other.
Exactly.
But here's where I want to push back a little, or at least play devil's advocate. Because the fear, and it's a legitimate fear, is that as soon as you say different, people hear worse. If you admit the brains are wired differently, aren't you just handing ammunition to people who want to say, see? Women can't be CEOs. Their brains are too emotional.
That is the exact fear that created what Moore and Jessel call the conspiracy of silence. They document this pretty extensively. They talk about researchers, in academia who are essentially forbidden from studying sex differences.
There was that one example, the researcher applying for a grant.
Right. He wanted to study sex differences in brain development, and the rejection literally said, this work ought not to be done.
Wow.
Not that the methodology was flawed or the hypothesis was weak, but that the knowledge itself was dangerous.
Forbidden knowledge. That sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, not a university lab.
Precisely. And there's another story of a researcher who just quit the field entirely because, as he put it, the pressure on the truth was too high.
So the consensus was if you find a difference, you have to blame it on upbringing.
Yes. If you attribute it to biology, you are a sexist. Full stop.
But Moore and Jessel flip this, and this is the part I found most surprising. They argue that this denial of difference is actually what's holding women back.
This is their most provocative argument, and I think it's the one that requires the most thought. They say that if you pretend men and women are the same, you inevitably set the male standard as the default.
So the workplace, career paths.
The workplace, the career trajectory, the competitive structure, it's all historically been built around, let's say, male traits. So if you tell women you are the same as men, you're just forcing them to compete in a male-shaped world on male terms.
And the metric for a successful woman becomes how well she can act like a man.
Exactly. And if she struggles with that, or if she doesn't find it fulfilling, she feels like a failure. The authors have this quote that just nails it. Women have failed to be like men instead of succeeding at being women.
That's powerful.
By denying their unique biological strengths, we've actually made women second-class citizens in a man's world rather than first-class citizens in their own right.
Okay, so let's get specific. When they say unique biological strengths or wiring, what are we actually talking about? We're saving the deep anatomy for a later episode.
The hypothalamus and the corpus callosum, yeah, we'll get there.
But just on an aptitude level, what are the differences they highlight?
Well, they look at decades of testing data. And again, we have to issue the standard disclaimer. We are talking about averages. We're talking about bell curves.
Right, let's stick a pin in the bell curve because I want to really unpack that. But just generally speaking.
Generally speaking, the male brain seems organized for what they call systemizing. It's better at spatial tasks.
The map reading cliche. It always comes back to the map.
It's a cliche because it shows up in the data so consistently. Men tend to be better at judging speed and distance. It's a target-oriented brain.
Which makes sense, evolutionarily.
Right. Tracking prey, throwing a spear, navigating a landscape. It's a brain that compartmentalizes. It focuses on one thing at a time to the exclusion of everything else.
Which explains the male stare when you're trying to talk to a guy who is watching TV.
Biologically, yes. The male brain literally shuts down other channels to focus on the primary task. Now, contrast that with the female brain.
Okay.
It's wired for empathizing and connectivity. It has better verbal fluency, better fine motor coordination, and crucially, better peripheral awareness.
It sees the whole picture.
Literally and metaphorically.
Mm.
The female brain takes in more sensory data. It hears better, sees better in the dark, it picks up on nuance better. But the biggest difference is the connectivity between the hemispheres. The female brain has like a superhighway connecting the emotional centers to the verbal centers. Which means women can articulate emotion faster and more accurately than men can. They can read the emotional temperature of a room. You know, Moore and Jessel quote that old rhyme.
Oh, hogamus, higamus?
Hogamus, higamus, men are polygamous, higamus, hogamus, women are monogamous.
I had never heard that before reading this.
It's a playful way of describing a deep evolutionary split. Men are thing-oriented, women are people-oriented. The female survival strategy wasn't hunting the mammoth, it was keeping the tribe together.
Reading nonverbal cues.
Exactly. Noticing a baby's cry sounded slightly different. Noticing a neighbor was angry. That required a brain that is interconnected, always on, and highly sensitive to social data.
Okay, I promised we'd come back to the bell curve, and I think we have to do it now, because I can hear a listener screaming, but I'm a woman, and I'm great at maps.
And that listener is right to scream that. This is where the authors have a section called Scoring the Test, and it is absolutely crucial. We are talking about statistical distributions. Think of it like height.
Okay, height is a good analog.
On average, men are taller than women. That is a biological fact. However, I can easily find a woman who is taller than, say, 80% of men.
Sure.
And I can find a man who is shorter than 80% of women. The existence of that one tall woman doesn't disprove the rule that men are taller.
So you can have a male brain in a female body, or a female brain in a male body.
Yes. In fact, Moore and Jessel argue most of us are a mix, but, and this is the key, the bias is distinct. The center of the male bell curve and the center of the female bell curve are in different places.
In denying that central tendency just because there are exceptions?
That's just bad science. It's like saying, it's snowing in Florida today, so the climate isn't tropical.
It's weather versus climate. Individual versus average.
Exactly. The book emphasizes that while individuals can vary wildly, the populations do not.
Okay, so we have the biological argument. But the counter-argument, the blank slate argument, is incredibly stubborn. People will say, okay, sure, there are averages, but that's just because we train boys to be spatial and girls to be verbal.
Moore and Jessel tackle this head-on, and they bring up what I think is the most devastating piece of evidence in the book, the kibbutz experiments.
I was fascinated by this. This was essentially a massive real-world laboratory for social engineering, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. In Israel, the kibbutz movement had a very specific ideological goal, total equality. They believed they could erase gender roles if they just removed the social conditioning.
So they went all in.
All in, unisex clothes, shared showers, boys and girls did the exact same chores, played with the same toys.
No pink and blue boxes at all.
None. They actively discouraged traditional roles. If a girl tried to play house, they'd steer her toward the tractor. If a boy wanted to fight, they'd steer him toward the kitchen. It was the ultimate test of the blank slate theory.
And the results?
A total reversion to biology. As these children grew up, despite all the pressure to be the same, they naturally drifted apart. The women gravitated toward education, caregiving, community roles.
And the men.
The men gravitated toward agriculture, machinery, security, and politics, even when they were actively discouraged from doing so.
That's incredible.
In fact, the women in the kibbutz eventually demanded a return to more traditional family structures. They wanted to be with their children. They didn't want the communal rearing. Moran and Jessel argue that you can push against biology for a while, but eventually, nature wins.
This connects to something else the book mentions, the paradox of progress. We see it in Scandinavia today, too.
Right. You would think that in the countries with the most freedom and the most gender equality like Sweden or Norway, you'd see 50-50 representation in every job.
Half the engineers women, half the nurses men.
But we see the opposite. We see the differences get bigger in countries where women are totally free to choose whatever they want, and they have a social safety net so they don't have to take a high-paying job just to survive.
They choose the jobs that align with their biological preferences.
Nursing, teaching, social work, and the men choose engineering and tech. When economic necessity is removed, biological preference takes the wheel.
And this leads to what the authors call the misery of sameness. This was the part of the book that felt the most personal to me. It wasn't just data, it was about happiness.
It's about the psychological toll of fighting your own nature. If a woman has a strong biological drive for nurturing, for stability, for placing relationships above career competition, and society tells her, no, that's weakness. That's just the patriarchy brainwashing you.
You should want to be a killer CEO. What does that do to her?
It creates anxiety. It creates a war within the self. The authors argue that we have devalued the female contribution. We've decided that the only things that matter are the male things, making money, building bridges, conquering markets.
So we tell women, to be valuable, you must do those things too.
Instead of saying, hey, building a community, raising the next generation, maintaining the social fabric, those are actually just as valuable, if not more so.
Precisely. It's a call for a celebration of difference.
Yes. If we acknowledge that men and women bring different toolkits to the table, we can stop trying to turn women into defective men and start appreciating them as effective women.
So the takeaway from this first deep dive into brain sex is pretty clear. We are not blank slates.
Absolutely not. Biology is the bedrock of our personality.
Yeah.
We can build on it, we can suppress it, but we can't erase it.
And recognizing that isn't sexism, it's liberation.
It takes the shame out of the difference. It allows us to understand why we feel the way we do.
But this leaves us with a massive question. If we accept the premise that the brains are different, how on earth does it happen?
That is the mystery, because as we're about to find out, we all start the same.
That's the cliffhanger.
It is. In the next deep dive, we are going to travel back to the very beginning, the womb. We're going to look at the first 6 weeks of life, and here's the spoiler. The default setting for a human being is female.
Nature intends to make an Eve.
Nature creates a female unless something dramatic interrupts it. It takes a high-risk, volatile chemical explosion to turn that fetus into a male, and if that explosion doesn't happen exactly right, or if the timing is off by even a day, everything changes.
It sounds like a chemical war zone in there.
It is, and it explains so much about why men and women are the way they are.
Well, I am hooked. That is coming up in part 2. I want to leave you with one final thought from the book to chew on until then. It's a question Moore and Jessel ask.
It's a question worth asking.
Is a world of identical workers really better than a world of complementary partners? Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Catch you in the womb next time.